All right, moving on now. A Supreme Court bench headed by Justice D.Y. Chandrachud has held that GST Council recommendations only have a persuasive value and are not binding on the centre and state governments. The court said that both Parliament and state legislatures can equally legislate on the matters of goods and services tax. Emphasizing the importance of cooperative federalism, the top court held that in Indian federalism, centre and state always engage in a dialogue. All right, let me in fact bring in Abhishek Rastogi, who's the petitioner's counsel in this entire case, joining us here on the broadcast. Thank you very much, Abhishek Rastogi, for joining us. First off, if you can take us through exactly what the top court has said, and of course, this is going to have significant ramifications on the GST landscape and the workings of the GST Council.
Indeed, this will have great ramifications. Indeed, this is a landmark decision for two reasons today. One, the role of the GST Council. The GST Council will have now only the recommendatory role, which is very, very clear from this decision. In fact, if we see the provisions of the Indian Constitution, Article 279 capital A of the Indian Constitution provides powers to GST Council, but the Constitution is very clear that these will be in the form of a representation. So as a corollary, what will happen now is any recommendation of the GST Council which is thereafter implemented into a statutory provision, is subject to judicial review, which means that GST Council can give recommendations to both the centre and the state, but it will be up to the centre and the state to follow these recommendations. The states and the centre will be equally responsible for making any changes, and those changes must be in light of the other constitutional provisions so that there is no overreach or excessive delegation and so on and so forth. So I think a brilliant decision from the perspective of the powers of the GST Council. It will be a landmark decision and will give a lot of binding nature of precedents in various cases which are there before different courts, because a lot of these changes have happened basis the recommendation of the GST Council. So from that perspective, it is indeed a very, very important decision for every person who is involved in this GST litigation. From the other perspective, this decision is very important from the perspective of amount of tax which Indian importers will save, which is the technical point. The point today is that the GST on the ocean freight, which freight is a service received by the service exporter outside of India or the exporter of goods outside of India, the Indian importer should not bear that brunt. So every Indian importer will end up saving because of this decision.
Right. So what is now going to be the immediate implication in terms of a lot of this tax that has already been paid? Like you were earlier saying that a lot of people will be eligible for refunds. How is that going to progress?
Absolutely brilliant question. And I think it is not only those petitioners which are before the court. The Supreme Court today in this landmark decision has very categorically held that these provisions are unconstitutional. So every Indian importer is now eligible for refund. If they have paid taxes, they will be eligible for refund. If they have not paid taxes, they should not be bothered to pay taxes. If they have open litigation, if they have received show cause notices, if they have received investigation proceedings and summons, they must quote the Supreme Court decision and must clearly intimate to the tax authorities that the levy in itself is unconstitutional. So they will have either the benefit of not paying tax, and in those cases where they have paid tax, they will be eligible for full refund along with interest.
Now, on the other hand, as far as the GST Council functioning is concerned, how do you see that panning out going forward? Because the way it used to work was the GST Council would meet, come up with decisions that were taken, and then automatically they would be implemented. So that whole process will now undergo a change.
I think, to be very honest, GST Council has played a fabulous role in implementation of GST. What this order provides is that the GST Council will still continue to play a recommendatory role. The recommendations will have persuasive value on the state and the central government. But we must not forget the important role which GST Council has been playing. I'm sure GST Council will continue to play that important role. What court has said is that the cooperative federalism must be achieved through these provisions of the Constitution in such a way so that both the states and the central government understands the recommendation, but when the change is made based on the recommendations, the change must not be something which is against the provisions of the statute, or which is against the fundamental principles, or which is against the provisions of the constitution. So from that perspective, I think the GST Council will have a greater responsibility. The state and the center will also have equally greater responsibility. And I'm sure this decision will make our system more robust.
All right. Let me also bring in Kamruzaman Chaudhary of the Congress and Namit Saxena, lawyer and political analyst, who are joining us here on the broadcast as well. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining in. Let me first go across to Namit Saxena. Your reaction to what the top court has said here with respect to the GST Council and the entire landscape, so to speak. How do you see this changing now, the way the entire council functions, the way the GST functions in the country?
See, what the Supreme Court has now done is they've reduced the role of the GST Council to a recommendatory body. See, what they have said, whatever GST Council would say is not binding upon the states or the center as such. So whatever GST Council will say will have, although it will have recommendatory value, it will have persuasive value, but it will not be binding, and states and the center will have the independent choice to whether follow the recommendations or not. So this is how the function of the GST Council has, in a sense, been reduced to being a recommendatory body. But there are other things which I'm sure once the judgment comes out or once it is uploaded, we'll get to see, because the functions of the GST Council also includes for making special provisions for Northeast states and for the other various functions also the GST Council does. So we'll have to see once whether this only is qua subsuming of tax provisions, or is this judgment applicable on all the functions of the GST Council as such or not. But this is yet to be seen.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Saxena. Like you pointed out, still some clarity is needed here. But, what the GST was envisaged as, and what the GST Council was envisaged as, and now with this judgment, that whole process is now going to undergo a change. So do you think that we might see a situation where, some states adopt part of it, some states choose not to adopt a part of it, and that sort of disparity then coming in, which in a way then sort of, negates what the GST had set out to do in the first place?
Yes, this is a very pertinent question. This is how I see is going to happen, because the basis of the judgment of the Supreme Court is cooperative federalism. So that cooperative federalism is not only between center and the states, it is also inter-state. So once the judgment comes out, see, the composition of GST Council is such that, that few states which are aligned with the ruling establishment may tend to adopt whatever the GST Council is saying, but the neighboring state may not, permit or may choose to distinguish itself from whatever the GST Council is now recommending. So this is how there will be some disparity, but once the judgment comes, we'll have to see as to how to overcome this, because the basis of the judgment is cooperative federalism. So that must be followed in letter and spirit. So it is between states as such as well, which is to be followed. But yes, you're right. There'll be some disparity as the states will choose to, because the state governments are more inclined towards, or they know they are more aware towards what are the requirements of that particular state, what are the tax compositions of the particular state. So now this will, in a set scenario, may have disparity between states as well.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, let me also go across to Mr. Chaudhary, who's back with us here. Mr. Chaudhary, your reaction to what the top court has said and this, issue with regard to the GST.
Yeah, actually, we were expecting this judgment coming in, since considering the entire hierarchy after the GST was implemented in the first place, we have seen multiple changes to the basic structure of the GST over the period of last few years. Basically, the central government and the state governments are at loggerheads on various issues with regards to the GST. Now that the Supreme Court has ruled that one nation, one tax cannot be implemented with regards to the GST, it is moving towards that direction. And why has it come to this step? The central government, the finance ministry needs to explain to the nation what is the actual status of the GST right now. Why are the states complaining that the GST dues are not being, they are not getting their GST dues on time? These things needs to be explained. Then secondly, we consider this as a landmark judgment in the interest of the cooperative federalism that the Supreme Court has ruled so far, and hope to see much more power at the hands of the states rather than the center bullying the state governments into submission on various issues with regards to the fund distribution. from the center.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Abhishek Rastogi, coming back to you on that other point as well about, that we were just discussing about this entire process may see somewhat of a negation of what GST had set out to do, which is be uniform, and we may see different states choosing to adopt different recommendations, and how you see that perspective.
See, I see it in a slightly different way and much more optimist. One, to answer you on the issue of whether the GST Council role will be recommendatory for all areas, the answer is yes. The Constitution very specifically provides that these will be treated as recommendations. Article 279 capital A very clearly provides that all of these areas enumerated there in this article, the GST Council role will be as a recommendation. While this issue may have been just with respect to ocean freight, we cannot dilute the value of the decision today to restrict it only to one or specific areas. It will be applicable, to the best of my understanding, to all areas which are covered under 279 capital A. I don't see any doubt there. Now, as far as the disparity is concerned, I think I'm more optimist here. We have seen GST Council and the state and the central government and all of these states to have unanimously decided on most of the issues. There has been voting only once in the GST Council decision. So I don't see that fundamentally the functioning will change. I think what I see is that any recommendation which will come from the GST Council will now be more elaborately discussed and debated from the perspective of the constitutional validity. Because what this decision says is that it doesn't say that you need not listen to GST Council at all. That's not what the intention is. The intention is to very clearly provide that it comes as a recommendation. Any recommendation which comes from the GST Council must be tested in terms of the vires, in terms of the constitutionality, in terms of the larger public benefit, and in terms of the objectives of the GST. So I think from that perspective, I would be more optimist to say that there will not be any disparity as such between the center and the state, so as to speak, but there'll be more debates, there'll be more discussion, the process will be more robust, there will be more informed calls, there will be more discussions with the legal ministry, law ministry, so as to ensure that any change which happens in the structure or the framework now gets an approval from the legal cell. So I think from that perspective, we are more prepared today subsequent to this decision for a more robust tax system, because the country today needs more certainty. And I think that's what will be the framework of this going forward. So I'm personally very optimistic about the aftermath of this decision.
Of Abhishek Rastogi, but Mr. Saxena, if I can come back to you here in respect to what Abhishek Rastogi just said, what is your own perspective? Do you agree that this is going to, perhaps reduce the somewhat of the confusion that we had been seeing in several aspects of the GST?
I think this will rather cause uncertainty now.
Okay.
Because see, for example, GST, one of the functions of the GST Council is to set out the threshold limit below which the services and goods will be exempted from GST. Now, once the recommendations by GST Council are only recommendatory in nature, states will tend to choose different threshold limits, which will vary across the states and across the country now. So, although till now, Mr. Abhishek is right that till now GST Council, there was sort of a uniformity in whatever they're adopting. But after this decision, there is going to be uncertainty, because states will now choose whatever they want to choose, even if the GST Council recommends otherwise. So this is, in my view, is going to cause some sort of uncertainty as I see it. Similarly, the GST rates, which include floor rate also, with the bands of IGST, or a special rate for time, to arrange resources for any natural calamity also. Now, few of the states in the country, for example, Odisha, which is, very regularly hit by cyclones or other natural calamities, will tend to choose something which is not very common in Rajasthan, which is not otherwise hit by natural calamity. So this is going to cause uncertainty in a lot of layers and a lot of factors, which is now yet to be seen as to how things progress. I hope so, as Mr. Abhishek is also optimist. I am also being optimistic that, this will not provide, this will not cause a hurdle in any march towards equality or in a march towards, having a good tax regime. But I'm still apprehensive about what this judgment has, got into its fold. Let's see how it goes.
Right. Fair enough. Mr. Chaudhary, coming to you here, where do you stand between, what we've just heard, both sides of the argument there about the implications of this entire change?
No, basically, it's a very uncertain future with regards to the GST right now. But honestly, I feel there will be a greater say of the states right now in the GST Council. The center will be bound to listen to at least some objections, some suggestions from the state, which was earlier missing. Certain policies, certain decisions were bulldozed to the states by the center just because of the sheer economic might. Now, might be that we might see a better future. Let us be optimistic and let's see how it all pans out. If it doesn't pan out, then we need to sit together and discuss. But originally, when we mooted the GST regime during our UPA regime, that has completely changed from the GST that the BJP government has brought in. And it has brought in an utter chaos in the entire taxation system of the country. You know what Rahul Gandhi called the GST regime as a Gabbar Singh tax. I hope that Gabbar Singh tax is no longer there after this ruling. And we are very optimistic and very hopeful that this ruling today will get together and we can see a better tax regime in the country rather than a terrifying tax structure.
All right, we'll leave it there. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us and putting all of this into context. Of course, it remains to be seen now how this is going to change and what is going to be the role of the GST Council going forth. We will, of course, keep track of all of those developments.